Um, it is my honor really to introduce to you now Father Fidelis Moshinsky of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. And I know Father from, well, a ways back when he was actually doing rescues with a bishop. Daniel Lynch, if I got the name correct. George Lynch, yes. Where Bishop Lynch and Father Fidelis would sit down in the driveway of abortion clinics to prevent the cars from going into the parking lot and so on. And I have such the highest respect for both of them. George Lynch, I think he's a saint, died some time ago. And if I'm not mistaken, he was an auxiliary bishop of Charlotte, North Carolina? Raleigh. Okay.
He came and spoke for us once.
Oh, that was a great treat. I actually met him during one of the hearings. He came to one of the hearings, maybe he actually testified during the NOW versus Scheidler case in Chicago, and we went out to lunch together. So that was the one time I had met him, and he was already then quite elderly. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Father Fidelis, who's going to talk to you about the principles and some of the technical issues that surround, and maybe a little bit of history as well in terms of the rescue movement. So please welcome Father Fidelis Moshinsky.
Thank you. I should just start by saying I have a little bit of a chronic asthma. I don't have the Chinese virus. So if you see me cough, I'm not going to fall over dead. It's just when the weather gets cold and damp, I get this asthma, so don't worry about it. Sometimes I need to clear my throat to talk. So, long live Christ the King and the Virgin of Guadalupe.
Viva.
Our Lady of Guadalupe is close to all of our hearts. I know she is especially the patroness of my order, the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and we have her image in all of our friary chapels. And today is a day that we communally consecrate ourselves to Our Lady under her title of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And for many, many, many years now, I've been leading rosary processions where we bring the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe to the killing place. And on a number of occasions we've had, if you're familiar with the missionary images of Our Lady of Guadalupe, particular images that were blessed by the bishops in Mexico and intended to travel throughout the world. And of course, when Our Lady went to go meet St. Juan Diego on Mount Tepeyac, she gave him as a sign for the bishop red Castilian roses. So in God's beautiful providential plan, he arranges us, even though maybe we wanted to have this conference a number of months earlier, he knew from all eternity today was the day to have the first Red Rose Rescue Conference. And I especially want to thank all of you for coming here today, expressing interest, curiosity, perhaps even a desire to think about getting more involved, whether you're here or you're on the Zoom call. I want to share with you some of my own experiences and thoughts of having participated and organized some of the Red Rose rescues. Since Since September of 2017, there have been, I think, almost 20 red nose rescues in various places in the United States. And the last one was just this past October 14th in Shrewsbury, New Jersey. Some of you in the audience were there. And we prepared for that rescue by having a time of prayer and a retreat, particularly on October 13th, Feast of Our Lady of Fatima, asking for her intercession. So of those about 20 rescues, I participated in about 10 of them, I think. And I want to talk to us today. I want to kind of articulate and hopefully communicate to you what we do and why we do it. And then lastly, why you should be helping us and we all together continue this work of the Red Nose Rescue. In the beginning, back in 2017, there were a number of news articles written from the pro-abortion perspective about this new initiative of Red Nose Rescue, and the authors were speculating that, the militant wing of the pro-life movement is now feeling emboldened because they have Donald Trump in the White House. And I have to tell you honestly, I don't think when we started in September 2017 and the months leading up to that, the meetings and the discussions, frankly, it had nothing to do with Donald Trump. And the Red Nose rescues will continue whether or not Donald Trump is in the Oval Office or not. And it will continue regardless of what happens with the Chinese virus. We had a rescue in March, two actually, in Washington, D.C., kind of at the beginning of this so-called pandemic, and again, just recently, as I mentioned. So the question is, well, if it's not connected to Trump and we're going to keep doing it, well, why? What motivates us? And it's a big question, but I want to start by making reference to a verse from Scripture, which is very important to us. Proverbs 24:11. Rescue those being led to death. Hold back those who are staggering towards the slaughter. This is a divine commandment God placed in His holy word, addressed to all people, an obligation to respond, to intervene in an emergency situation when there is an innocent person who is in danger of death, and we know about that, and we could do something to save them. Now we know, of course, that in the pro-life movement, there's many ways to intervene to try to save the mothers and the children. And we've spoken about that already. That we need, of course, to be present and effective and persistent in many different areas: politics, media, education, entertainment. But the one place where it's absolutely essential that pro-lifers be present is, of course, at the killing place. That's why I'm very pleased that some of our group were able to go even this morning to pray and to witness at an abortion place. Because if we're not there, then in some sense, everything we say that sounds pro-life kind of rings hollow. It could be thrown back at us. You don't really believe that that's an unborn child, that that's a human being that's being killed, if you're not there regularly whenever that is happening. very influential priest in my life, Monsignor Philip Riley, uses this analogy. He talks about a group of people, and they hear that a ship out in the ocean is sinking, and it's full of people. And these people come together, and they say, hey, have you heard the news? There's this ship out there, and it's sinking. Maybe we should get together, and we have to do something about this. So we need to find out a better way to build ships so they don't sink. And let's have a meeting, we'll form a committee. And the first thing we have to figure out, well, what are we going to call ourselves? And what is going to be our logo? And then somebody raises their hand and they say, hey, wait a minute. Maybe there's people out there right now who are in danger of death, who need our help. And we need to go down to the shore and arrange some kind of rescue. Now, of course, we need conferences and meetings and plans, and we have a beautiful logo, I think. Although it's somewhat ambiguous as I was looking at it. It obviously symbolizes when we go into the abortion clinic with red roses, we hand them to the mothers, and sometimes the roses are received. And we have attached to the rose a little card with the crisis pregnancy information on it. But then there's other times when, no, the rose is rejected. And you don't know that hand, if it's reaching out to receive it or to reject it. We're in that midst, we're in that moment right now, brothers and sisters, where God is calling us into this battle. And we need so many more people going inside with these offers of love and compassion and real help, handing out these roses. Some will be accepted, some will be rejected. That's not up to us to determine. Our only responsibility is to be there to rescue those who are being led away to death. I first got involved with Operation Rescue when I was a college student at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And it was the late 80s. And we know that between 1977 and 1989, there were, according to published statistics, 24,380 arrests connected with Operation Rescue in those years. It started out in the late 70s, smaller groups, and then finally, towards the late 80s, with the charismatic leadership of Randall Terry, hundreds of people were sitting down, blocking the doorways, the driveways of the abortion places, and closing them down. And that was very effective. It was so effective that we have heard persons involved in the abortion movement who were really thinking that this is the end of legalized abortion in the United States. Because of this movement, there were more people arrested through Operation Rescue than there had been arrested during the civil rights movement. In response, So in response to that widespread, effective movement of civil disobedience, the government passed a law called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, 1994. And whereas previously, all of these 24,000 people who were arrested were usually charged with kind of a minor violation, a misdemeanor, trespassing. Many times they didn't have to go to jail, although some did. but the cost was somewhat minimal. But now, with this new federal law, first-time offense, if it's nonviolent, and we were always nonviolent, would be $10,000 fine and 6 months in jail. And so a consequence of this federal law is that the numbers involved with Operation Rescue pretty much dropped off precipitously. But on the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, October 7th, 1989, the priest I mentioned previously, Monsignor Philip Riley, founded a pro-life ministry called the Helpers of God's Precious Infants. And you might have heard of it, basically people gathering in church, celebrating Mass, having Eucharistic adoration, and then beginning to pray the Rosary in the church, processing with Our Lady of Guadalupe, walking to a nearby abortion place, praying the whole Rosary, then coming back to the church for benediction. But while they're there praying, there are specially trained counselors reaching out to the people going inside. And so the Helpers of God's Precious Infants from 1989 and through the 90s grew, spread throughout not only the United States, but even throughout the world. Monsignor Riley traveled to many different countries, training people, training laity and priests and bishops how to organize these pro-life vigils. Not only the large monthly vigils, but then to have small groups of committed people present throughout the week. And it was so successful, and many, many mothers and children were spared from abortion because of it. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops officially endorsed the Helpers of God's Precious Infants. And so they can still continue today, and every first Saturday of the month we have a large prayer vigil at the Planned Parenthood in Lower Manhattan. And there's many other places that do that as well. Moving on from there, another kind of new initiative, similar to the Helpers, is, as you know, the 40 Days for Life. So whereas the Helpers of God's Precious Infants try to be present throughout the year, as we know that the 40 Days for Life have two kind of intense campaigns each year, and they have also been incredibly successful. Now, I get into all of that because when we think about what we're doing as Red Rose Rescue, it's somewhat of a hybrid between the original rescue movement and these developments that came later with the Helpers in the 40 days. One of the initial sparks or inspirations for Red Rose Rescue was the amazing and witness of Mary Wagner, a Canadian woman who, on her own, individually, many times would go into the abortion places in Canada, Toronto and other places, and she would hand red roses to the women scheduled for abortion and try to persuade them to leave with her and get some help if they needed that help. Mary Wagner spent probably 5 to 6 years in total in jail because of that work. But there were a number of people who were involved with the original rescue movement who saw Mary Wagner's witness and asked themselves, why can't we do here in the United States what Mary is doing in Canada? And so those conversations grew and certain meetings occurred, culminating in September 2017 on the 17th, which I believe that's the feast of the exaltation of the cross. or was it Our Lady of Sorrows? It was a special feast day on that day. And we had 3 Red Rose rescues, one in Michigan, one in Alexandria, Virginia, and one in New Mexico. Now, I just want to, for those of you who might have seen some of the either videos or news stories about the rescue, I want to just basically explain what concretely happens. First of all, it's usually only a small team of people who go into the abortion clinic. There's a larger group of people who are involved outside. As we mentioned earlier today, the sidewalk counseling is very important. We have prayer support. We have people who are designated to contact the media. So there's kind of a role for everybody. But this the small team of people, we prepare very intensely, spiritually beforehand. And we make sure we go to an abortion place on a date and a time when we know abortions are scheduled to occur. And if you can imagine the situation where you have the sidewalk counselors outside approaching mothers and fathers, boyfriends, girlfriends, going in and reaching out, offering a flyer, trying to initiate a conversation. That same dynamic we want to bring inside into the waiting room. Because there is absolutely no reason why, just because the abortion industry claims to establish a property line, that we have to desist in our acts of charity and reaching out to the mothers. Because we know that property line, in one sense, is invalid. They're trying to claim that as a barrier, and oftentimes we've fallen into this way of thinking, well, there's the abortion clinic, they have their place, we have our place, this is where we always stand, this is where we can't go beyond, and it's kind of like a détente. Red Rose Rescue says, okay, there are times when we need to be present and effective outside. But we do not accept the legitimacy of this artificial barrier. So just imagine going to a doctor, your own medical doctor, a dentist appointment. You walk into the waiting room. There's no big drama. There's no shouting. Just a group of people sitting in a room. And so we walk in and we sit down and we look to initiate some conversations with the mothers who are there. We have roses with us, which we try to hand out. Now, the goal is to convince one or more of these mothers to get up and to leave with us and to go to a crisis pregnancy center, or just to get them to leave. Okay. At some point, the abortion staff recognizes that we are not there as patients. And sometimes there's a security guard. So they tell us we can't be there, we have to leave. At that point, we immediately, very calmly, explain who we are and why we're there. One of us likes to say we are patient advocates, because we recognize not only is the mother a patient, but she has a patient in her womb. And we are there to advocate on behalf of them, to speak up for what's medically necessary for them. And so, as you can imagine, it varies place to place. Some abortion clinics were able to have very interesting and fruitful conversations with the abortion staff. In fact, there's the one place in Washington on Georgia Avenue, Washington, D.C. We've gone 4 times, and they've they come to know who we are, and they even recognize the very impressive Bill Goodman over there. And so you might think, based on maybe something that was said earlier today, that there's this necessarily immediate conflict and tension. But that's not necessarily the case. Oftentimes, though, the abortion staff take the mothers who are waiting for the abortion into a back room, and we're left there in the waiting room by ourselves. And then very soon the police come. And then that initiates another whole phase of the rescue. Usually one of us, sometimes me, is appointed to be the spokesperson with the police. And this is very important because the police get a phone call from the abortion clinic. And they hear that, oh, these terrorists have invaded our clinic and they're harassing and being very aggressive with people. So the police are coming in expecting trouble. And so the first thing we immediately do is I immediately identify myself as a Catholic priest. And although I don't walk in to the abortion clinic wearing my habit, I have it in a bag, and I very soon put it on. And so we de-escalate the tension immediately with the police. So there's no danger of anything violent happening there. And the officers almost immediately recognize that we're peaceful, we're sincere, we're not going to cause any problems, but yet we're very committed to what we're doing. And they discover that when they ask us to get up and leave. They tell us we're trespassing. And it's at this point that it becomes interesting, the conversations you could have with the police. One of the things I often say to them is that we are directly intervening to save life. Just like you, officer, have to intervene when you get a call and you hear somebody's in danger, there's a crime being committed somewhere. And we say to the police, like 99.9% of the time, you gentlemen are doing excellent work. But today, right now, it would be a mistake. It would be wrong for you to arrest us. You ought to, in fact, join with us in trying to stop the abortions that are happening here. Now, some police are willing to kind of have a conversation back and forth. In fact, I had one officer in Alexandria, and he was quoting scripture to me, and he said, well, doesn't your Bible say, give to Caesar what is Caesar's? In other words, he was giving me an order as the representative of Caesar to get up and leave. And I said, no, it doesn't work that way. The rescues we did in Washington, the officers were very responsive, and we were able to be present in the waiting room for sometimes up to an hour or 2 hours, really. And partly because I think locally they have a policy where they have to give a warning to people before they arrest them for trespassing 3 times. You can only imagine that there's many protests down in Washington, D.C., and perhaps at some point in the past, people were arrested and they weren't part of that group, and so the police have to give the warning over and over again. So what that means for us is the longer we could disrupt the normal functioning of the killing place, the better. And if you have 5 or 6 police inside, 8 or 10 patrol vehicles outside, setting up the police perimeter, the normal business of killing the children at that place, if it's not has already stopped, it's certainly paused. So we try to have these very respectful conversations with the police, appealing to their conscience. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, the answers you get from the police when you challenge them about that they should not be arresting you is that, well, we're just following orders. You're technically trespassing, you're breaking the law. And of course, you can take the conversation different ways. You can say, well, we've heard that before, haven't we, in history? Officers who were just following orders, but now we look back and we say they should not have followed those orders. Those orders were immoral, and they should have known better. Another very important thing, and I have to stress this because it has not yet been mentioned today. Don't think that the sole reason Red Rose rescues occur is simply to save the lives of the children and to spare the mothers from abortion. There's another equally important goal, and that is to give visible expression to our solidarity and love for the children who are being killed. In other words, those children deserve, even if we cannot save them, they deserve to be surrounded with love and prayer in their final moments. If you think of a person, even imagine yourself, in the hospital, you have a fatal disease. The doctors have told you there's nothing more we can do for you. Would you not want members of your family, people who loved you, to surround you and to console you and to be present with you? Wouldn't your very humanity demand that and deserve it? And so that's the reason why, after they take the mothers perhaps to a different room, and there's no more counseling possibilities happening in the waiting room, but we know just in another part of the building, it's at least possible that abortions could be occurring. And so when the police handcuff us and place us under arrest, we do not therefore just think, well, it's over. I'm just going to stand up and walk out now. No, we go limp, kneel, or sit on the floor, and the police are forced to carry us out because we will not willingly cooperate in our removal from the abortion place. We want to remain as present there as long as possible. As you can imagine, this sets up kind of a new conflict situation with the police. They don't come across this. Normally, somebody in the public gets their handcuffs behind them. They just walk in, into the police car, and that's it. So we have to then explain, as I'm trying to do now, why we're not getting up and walking out. However, once we get to, and I should say, not everybody could do that. Maybe for some physical reasons, it would be better for the personal health of the rescuer that they stood up and walked out. And there's a way to do that quite slowly and gently, with kind of taking the same amount of time. But as Monica said, we have this ideal, this goal that we're striving for, not only with regard to the court, but our own behavior in the waiting room. Now, so they carry us out, and once we get into the police vehicle, then our practice has been, and it makes sense that we do this, we fully cooperate with the police. So they bring us to the station, we give our name, our address, personal information to one degree or another. That allows them to process us and most often charge us with trespassing and give us a notice to appear in court. Interestingly, at that point, the police, there's a different dynamic that occurs between us and the police. And I like to think of this, kind of the Red Rose Rescue. It's certainly a witness, but it's also very much evangelization and formation of conscience. Generally, people want to do the right thing, but they need to be encouraged to do it. And sometimes they have errors that have embedded themselves in their minds that need to be dispelled. And as rescuers, we try to engage in that work, not only with the mothers, but with the abortion staff and with the police as well. By the time we get to the station, the police feel they've won. There we are in custody. It's over. And so they become very friendly to us. Madison, New Jersey, a couple summers ago, the captain of the police, having us all in custody, was walking around with water bottles, asking us, it was a hot summer day, do you want regular water, do you want sparkling water? This is not the kind of treatment you would expect. The officer who was processing me was a big Yankee fan, so when I gave him my address as being in the Bronx, we started talking about the Yankees and his special deals that he would get of tickets and travel and everything. So it's really an opportunity also to talk about spiritual things and to explain further to the police who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. Because it could happen, and it has happened, although it's rare, that in the past, a police officer would say, I can't, he'd say to his commanding officer, I can't be involved in this, I can't arrest these people. There was an officer, Chet Gallagher, if I have his name correct, he refused to arrest rescuers. In fact, in Washington, D.C., at one of the rescues I was at, there was one of the officers told our people outside that he was a Knight of Columbus. And he was inside the waiting room there with us initially, and he had to remove himself from the situation, and he went outside. And we found out later that he had problems in his conscience because he knew what we were doing was right. Okay. Now, Monica mentioned a little bit about how our Red Rose Rescue witness continues in the court. So I won't get into too much with that, but just simply to say, one thing that's not negotiable is that we always plead not guilty. Now, we are blessed to have lawyers, pro bono lawyers, work for us and represent us. We don't have to pay them. And they're very generous men and women. However, they're lawyers. And if you're a good lawyer, you're going to figure out all the different ways to get your client off. And sometimes that puts us in a little bit of a situation where we have to explain to the lawyer, we're not going to accept this deal that the prosecutor is offering us. Because that often happens. This is what happens in court. There's so many cases. There's only so much people and time. They want to process things quickly, so let's offer a plea deal. And if you're ever in court in those situations, if it's not anything like this, more likely than not, you'll take the plea deal. I don't have to pay this big fine. I just have to maybe go to anger management class or something. Who knows? But as a matter of principle, we do not accept the plea deal because that means you plead guilty and then you agree to these terms. As Monica said, we're not guilty. And I want to emphasize this because Dr. Janice Smith mentioned it briefly in her talk about the specific argument that we direct our lawyers to make in court. And you see, when you hire a lawyer, when a lawyer agrees to represent you, you tell him the kind of defense after he explains what the different options are. So we instruct the lawyer to make this argument before the judge that abortion is totally illegitimate killing of innocent children